In Russia, more than 1,000 people have joined protests over the arrest of an activist and a prominent Kremlin critic. Demonstrations have taken place in the semi-autonomous Republic of Bashkortostan, which has seen a high number of casualties in Ukraine. Police detained Fail Alsynov, who had publicly criticized Moscow's mobilization drive for the war.
A protester sliding on the ice as he's hauled away by police. Neither freezing temperatures nor the threat of imprisonment stopped more than 1,000 people in Bashkortostan using traditional Bashkir songs and dance to protest the arrest of a local rights activist. But it wasn't long before police put a stop to it.
Do we live under a fascist regime here or what? Every person has a constitutional right to express their own opinion. I'm not calling for an armed mutiny, am I?
It was a far cry from a mutiny, but it was one of the biggest protests since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Demonstrators are furious about the arrest of Fail Alsynov, an environmental activist considered a local hero and champion of the Bashkir people. He was convicted of inciting ethnic hatred and sentenced to 4 years in prison for a comment he says was mistranslated. Alsynov has also harshly criticised the government over the disproportionate number of ethnic minority men being sent to fight in Ukraine. He's called the mobilisation drive a genocide of the Bashkir people. But local authorities have characterised Alsynov and his supporters as separatist extremists, with the Kremlin downplaying the significance of the protests that have broken out in the region since his arrest.
I would not agree with the wording mass riots or mass protests. There are no mass riots and mass protests there. There are separate demonstrations which concern local authorities and local police exclusively. But once again, I categorically disagree with the idea that these are mass demonstrations.
But with Russia's next presidential election right around the corner, any display of anti-government sentiment, no matter the size, is an unwelcome one.
Let's go straight to DW's Juri Rescheto, who joins us now from Riga in Latvia, as DW is banned from reporting in Russia. So, Juri, protests are spreading. What more do we know at this point?
Well, according to media reports, Sarah, at least 2,000 people gathered in Salavat Square in Ufa, the capital of Bashkortostan, the Republic of Russia. Salavat was a Bashkir poet, a national hero and a fighter for the rights of the country's indigenous people. The protesters today tried with all their looks, appearance, not to provoke the police in any way, for example, not even to show that they came to the protest because it's dangerous in Russia. Instead, they came up with, let's say, creative tricks such as taking each other's hands and dancing around, trying not to gather in one place and walking from side to side. At the beginning, of the action, police officers selectively checked people's documents and warned them of responsibility for illegal action, what they say. And when they asked the people why they were there, the protesters answered that they just came to look at the monument to Salavat Yuliyev. But that didn't work for long. Soon after the action began, special police called OMON appeared at the square and began point-by-point detentions. At least 10 people were detained at the rally so far.
So these are regional protests, as we've highlighted there, Juri. Does it mean anything for, more broad politics in Russia and for Putin's grip on power?
Yes, of course. I mean, presidential elections will be held in Russia in 2 months' time, and Vladimir Putin wants to be re-elected with an overwhelming majority. So his popularity is very important to him right now. Of course, these are not protests in Moscow where they could be particularly dangerous for the Kremlin, not are they protests directly against Putin. But the fact that so many people are still taking to the streets in Putin's Russia despite the risk of being arrested and imprisoned for many years This fact is remarkable. Also, there is another aspect that makes it more complicated, which is the nationality issue. Because it's not the ethnic Russians who are taking to the streets here, but Bashkirs, who obviously feel dominated by the Russians. As in Bashkortostan, national minorities in other republics also feel that Russian domination and sometimes discreditation. So they remain silent and tolerate this. They are asleep, so to speak, but only as long as Moscow is strong.
DW's Riga Bureau Chief Juri Rescheto, thank you.